A winter's encounter. The brisk Vermont winter nipped at Nathaniel Ward's face as he turned the corner towards his bakery, the Golden Crust. The small town of Millfield was cloaked in a frosty stillness, the kind that only came in the early hours before dawn. Streetlights cast pale glows over fresh snow, the silence broken only by the crunch of Nathaniel's boots. It was a routine morning, one he'd repeated countless times since opening his bakery 6 years ago. At 38, Nathaniel had grown used to these tranquil mornings, finding solace in the quiet preparation of bread and pastries before the world awoke. Yet this morning, something was different. As he reached his bakery's door and fished out his keys, a faint, muffled sound reached his ears. A whimper. Nathaniel froze, the sound cutting through the stillness. He turned his head towards the street, but saw nothing unusual, just snow-covered sidewalks and empty streets. Shaking off the unease, he started to unlock the door when the sound came again, louder this time. His eyes scanned the dimly lit alley beside the bakery, finally landing on a large, slightly weathered cardboard box near the building's edge. It was tucked into a corner as if deliberately placed there. His stomach tightened as he hesitated, unsure of what he might find. Slowly, he approached the box, the muffled noises growing clearer with each step. Kneeling beside the box, Nathaniel cautiously peeled back the top flaps. His breath caught. Inside were 3 children, huddled together, shivering from the cold. The eldest, a girl who couldn't have been older than 8, clutched a toddler tightly in her arms. Beside them sat a boy, probably 6, his face pale and streaked with dirt. All 3 pairs of eyes stared up at Nathaniel, wide with fear and confusion. "Oh my God," Nathaniel whispered, his heart lurching. "Who?" The girl flinched at his voice, her small frame tensing protectively around the toddler. Nathaniel softened his tone immediately. "It's okay," he said gently. "You're safe now. I'm going to help you." The children didn't reply, their fear palpable. Without another moment's hesitation, Nathaniel scooped up the box, careful not to jostle his precious cargo. He carried them into the warmth of his bakery, setting the box down gently on one of the worktables. The smell of rising dough and vanilla filled the room, but the children remained motionless, their faces wary. Nathaniel crouched down to their level, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. "My name's Nathaniel," he said softly. "What are your names?" The girl hesitated, her grip tightening on the toddler. Finally, she whispered, "I'm Ella. This is Max." She nodded towards the toddler. "And that's Charlie." "Ella, Max, and Charlie," Nathaniel repeated, offering a kind smile. "Those are nice names. Are you hungry?" At the mention of food, Charlie's head lifted slightly, his hollow cheeks a painful testament to hunger. Nathaniel stood up and busied himself in the kitchen, pulling out freshly baked rolls and heating up a pot of soup he'd planned for later. He wrapped warm blankets around the children and gave them each a steaming mug of cocoa. As the children cautiously ate, Nathaniel's mind raced. Who had left them out in the cold? Why here, at his bakery? And most pressing of all, what should he do now? He knew he had to call the authorities, but the haunted look in Ella's eyes gave him pause. There was something more to their story, something that made him hesitate to involve strangers who might frighten them further. Ella's wary gaze darted around the room as if assessing her surroundings for threats. Nathaniel noticed the way she positioned herself between her brothers and the door, a shield against the unknown. This wasn't just fear of abandonment, it was fear of pursuit. Nathaniel's train of thought was interrupted by the chime of the bakery's doorbell. His heart leaped into his throat. He turned, half expecting to see the person who had left the children. Instead, it was Claire, the town's postwoman and an old friend. Her cheerful greeting died in her throat when she saw the scene before her. "Nathaniel," she said cautiously, her eyes flicking between him and the children. "What's going on?" "It's a long story," Nathaniel replied, stepping closer to her. Keeping his voice low, he added, "I found them outside, in a box. Someone abandoned them." Claire's face softened with concern as she looked at the children, who were now clinging to each other in silence. "Have you called anyone?" "Not yet," Nathaniel admitted. "They're scared, Claire. I didn't want to make things worse." Claire nodded, her professional demeanor kicking in. "Let me call Angela. She's a social worker in town. She'll know how to handle this." Nathaniel agreed reluctantly, his stomach twisting. While Claire stepped outside to make the call, he returned to the children, crouching down to their level once more. "Ella," he said gently, "someone is coming to help, but I'll be right here the whole time. You don't have to be scared." Ella's lips quivered, but she nodded. "Promise you won't let them take Max and Charlie away," she whispered. Nathaniel's chest tightened. "I promise," he said firmly. A few minutes later, Claire returned, accompanied by Angela, a kind-looking woman in her early 50s. Angela knelt in front of the children, her warm, maternal presence immediately setting a different tone. "Hello, sweethearts," Angela said softly. "My name is Angela. I'm here to help." Ella clung to Nathaniel's arm, her small fingers digging into his sleeve. "Can we stay with him?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We don't want to go with strangers." Angela's eyes flicked to Nathaniel, a question in them. He nodded, realizing what she was silently asking. "If it's possible," he said, "I'd like to help." Angela hesitated, then smiled gently. "Let's talk about that. For now, let's just make sure these little ones are safe." As the bakery's warm light spilled into the snowy dawn outside, Nathaniel felt a profound shift within himself. This wasn't how he'd imagined his day or his life, but as he looked at Ella, Max, and Charlie, he knew there was no going back. He would do whatever it took to protect them. Little did he know, this decision would set off a chain of events that would test his courage, challenge his beliefs, and ultimately change all their lives forever. Threads of trust. The following morning, the sun rose over Millfield, painting the snow-covered streets in a pale golden glow. Inside the golden crust, the warmth of freshly baked bread filled the air, blending with the sounds of soft laughter and quiet conversations. It was a stark contrast to the tension that had filled the bakery the day before. Nathaniel woke early, his mind heavy with thoughts of the children. They had spent the night in the small guest room above the bakery, bundled together in a nest of blankets and pillows he had hastily prepared. Despite the warmth and safety of the room, Ella had remained alert, her eyes darting to every sound, her arms protectively wrapped around her brothers. Nathaniel had checked on them several times throughout the night, each visit fueling his determination to shield them from whatever horrors they had endured. As the clock struck 7, Nathaniel prepared breakfast. Warm oatmeal with cinnamon and honey, fresh orange juice, and buttery croissants. He placed the dishes on a tray and carried it upstairs, pausing at the door to the guest room. The muffled sounds of children's voices reached his ears. He knocked gently. "Come in," Ella's voice called, cautious but steady. Nathaniel opened the door to find the 3 children huddled on the bed. Max, the toddler, clung to Ella's arm, while Charlie sat cross-legged beside her, his small hands clutching a toy car Nathaniel had found among his storage boxes. Their faces brightened at the sight of the tray. "Good morning," Nathaniel greeted with a warm smile. "I brought breakfast." Charlie's eyes lit up. "Oatmeal," he exclaimed, sliding off the bed and rushing to the small table by the window. Ella remained seated, her gaze locked on Nathaniel. Her sharp eyes carried questions she hadn't yet voiced, but Nathaniel knew she was analyzing every detail, his tone, his posture, even the food on the tray. She was testing him, trying to decide if he was truly someone they could trust. "I thought we could eat together," Nathaniel added, pulling a chair closer to the table. Ella hesitated, then nodded. She carried Max to the table, setting him down on her lap before reaching for the smallest bowl. Nathaniel noticed how she served her brothers first, ensuring they had enough before taking a bite herself. "Do you like it?" Nathaniel asked, breaking the silence. Charlie nodded enthusiastically, his mouth full of oatmeal. Max gurgled happily, smearing honey across his cheek. Ella remained quiet but gave a small nod, her expression softening slightly. As they ate, Nathaniel decided to take a gentle approach. He didn't want to push them, but he needed answers, not just for their safety, but to understand how he could help. Ella, he began carefully, can you tell me a little about where you were before you came here? Her spoon paused midair. Why? She asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. I just want to understand what happened, Nathaniel said, so I can make sure you're safe. Ella glanced at her brothers, her protective instincts warring with her need to share the burden she carried. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We were with a woman. She called herself Miss Janice, but she wasn't nice. Nathaniel felt a chill run down his spine. Not nice how? She locked us in a room, Ella continued, her tone flat, as though recounting a story rather than her own experience. She said we had to stay quiet, or she'd call him. I don't know who he is, but I think he's bad. Really bad. Charlie looked up, his wide eyes filled with fear. She yelled a lot, he added, and she never gave us enough food. Nathaniel clenched his fists under the table, his heart breaking at their words. He forced himself to remain calm. How did you get here? He asked gently. Ella hesitated again. She left us in a car, said she'd be back, but she didn't come back. We got out and walked until we found the box. I thought maybe someone would find us there. Nathaniel swallowed hard, the weight of their story pressing down on him. These children had endured more than most adults could handle, yet here they were, resilient and brave. He had to do everything in his power to help them. You were very smart, Ella, he said sincerely. You kept your brother safe. I'm proud of you. Ella's eyes glistened, but she quickly blinked back the tears. What's going to happen to us now? She asked, her voice trembling. Nathaniel leaned forward, his expression resolute. I don't know all the answers yet, but I promise you this. I won't let anyone hurt you again. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Nathaniel stood, his stomach twisting with apprehension. He opened the door to find Angela, the social worker, standing on the threshold. Her kind face was lined with concern, and she carried a folder tucked under her arm. Good morning, Nathaniel, she greeted softly. May I come in? Of course, Nathaniel replied, stepping aside. Angela entered the room and immediately crouched to the children's level, offering them a warm smile. Hello again, Ella, Charlie, Max. How are you doing today? Ella stiffened, her guard snapping back into place. We're fine, she replied curtly, pulling Max closer. Angela didn't push. Instead, she turned to Nathaniel. Can we talk privately for a moment? Nathaniel nodded and led her into the small kitchen. Once the door was closed, Angela's expression grew serious. We've done some digging, she began. It seems these children may be connected to a larger issue. What do you mean? Nathaniel asked, his pulse quickening. Angela hesitated before answering. We believe they were part of a human trafficking operation. Nathaniel's heart sank. Trafficking. But they're just kids. I know, Angela said softly. Unfortunately, children are often targeted because they're vulnerable. From what Ella has told us, it sounds like they were being held as leverage, possibly to coerce someone else into compliance. Nathaniel felt a surge of anger. Who would do something like this? And why? We don't have all the answers yet, Angela admitted, but the police are investigating. In the meantime, the children need to stay in protective custody. Protective custody, Nathaniel repeated, his stomach twisting. What does that mean? Angela placed a reassuring hand on his arm. It means we need to move them to a safe house where they'll be closely monitored and cared for. It's temporary, but it's the best way to ensure their safety. Nathaniel's mind raced. The thought of the children being taken away, even temporarily, filled him with dread. He thought of Ella's mistrustful eyes, Charlie's hopeful smile, and Max's innocent gurgles. They needed stability, not more upheaval. "What if they stay here?" he asked impulsively. "I can keep them safe." Angela looked at him, surprised. "Nathaniel, this isn't just about safety. These children have been through a traumatic experience. They'll need therapy, medical care, and constant support. I can provide that," Nathaniel insisted. "I'm not saying I'll replace their parents, but I can be here for them. They trust me." Angela studied him for a long moment. "It's not that simple," she said finally. "But I'll talk to my team. If we can work something out, it might be possible." Nathaniel nodded, determination hardening his resolve. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let these children face them alone. Shelter in the storm. The biting wind howled through the empty streets of Millfield as night descended. Inside the golden crust, the warmth of the ovens created a cozy haven, but the atmosphere was far from calm. Nathaniel stood in the kitchen, rolling out dough with deliberate precision. The rhythmic motion helped to steady his racing thoughts as he mulled over Angela's visit and the revelations about the children's circumstances. In the guest room upstairs, Ella, Charlie, and Max were tucked into bed, their soft breathing the only indication of their presence. Nathaniel had spent the evening reading to them, his voice steady even as his mind churned with unease. He had promised Ella they wouldn't be separated, and now the weight of that vow pressed heavily on his shoulders. Angela's words haunted him. These children are connected to something much larger. A human trafficking operation. A network of cruelty that used innocent lives as commodities. The thought made Nathaniel's stomach churn. He couldn't fathom how anyone could be so heartless. But the evidence was clear. These children hadn't just been abandoned, they had escaped. As Nathaniel finished preparing the next day's dough, the bakery's doorbell chimed. He froze, his heart leaping into his throat. It was nearly midnight. Who could be visiting at this hour? Wiping his hands on a towel, he cautiously approached the door. Through the glass, he saw a figure bundled in a thick coat and scarf. A flash of relief washed over him as he recognized Angela. Nathaniel unlocked the door and ushered her inside, the cold night air rushing in behind her. Angela's face was pale, her expression tense. "I'm sorry for coming so late," she said, her voice low. "But we need to talk." Nathaniel gestured for her to sit at one of the small tables near the counter. "What's wrong?" he asked, pulling out a chair across from her. Angela hesitated, her hands clasped tightly. "There's been movement. The people involved in this trafficking ring. There are signs they know the children are here." Nathaniel felt his blood run cold. "What do you mean?" Angela sighed. "The police have been monitoring communications and tracking known associates of the ring. Someone was seen near Millfield earlier today, asking questions about a group of children. We believe they're looking for Ella, Charlie, and Max." Nathaniel's fists clenched. "What can we do? How do we protect them?" "That's why I'm here," Angela said firmly. "We need to move them to a safe house tonight. It's the only way to keep them out of harm's reach." Nathaniel's chest tightened. He had feared this moment, but now that it was here, he realized just how unprepared he was to let the children go. "They're finally starting to trust me," he said. "What happens if we uproot them again?" Angela reached across the table, her eyes filled with empathy. "I know this is hard, Nathaniel, but their safety has to come first. The safe house is equipped to handle situations like this. They'll be protected, and they'll have access to therapists and caregivers who specialize in trauma." Nathaniel looked away, his jaw tight. "And what about after that? Will they just get shuffled around again?" "They need stability, Angela." Angela nodded. "You're right, and that's why we're going to work on finding a long-term solution. But for now, we have to get them out of here." Nathaniel took a deep breath, his mind racing. "Can I come with them?" he asked. "Even if it's just for a little while." Angela hesitated. "It's not standard procedure," she admitted, "but I'll talk to the team." If they agree, you might be able to stay nearby, as long as you don't interfere with the security measures." Nathaniel nodded, determination hardening his resolve. "I'll do whatever it takes." Upstairs, Ella stirred at the sound of footsteps on the stairs. She sat up, her heart pounding as she heard Nathaniel's voice through the thin walls. Her protective instincts kicked in, and she climbed out of bed, careful not to wake Charlie or Max. Creeping to the door, she cracked it open just enough to see Nathaniel standing at the top of the stairs. Behind him was Angela, her expression serious. "Ella," Nathaniel said softly, spotting her, "can we talk for a moment?" Ella hesitated, then stepped into the hallway. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice small. Nathaniel knelt in front of her, his eyes level with hers. "Angela's here because she thinks it's safer for you and your brothers to move to a new place tonight." Ella's face hardened. "No, we're not leaving. We're safe here." Nathaniel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I know you feel safe here, but Angela's right. There are people who might try to find you, and we need to make sure they don't." Tears welled in Ella's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You said we wouldn't be separated." "And I meant it," Nathaniel said firmly. "I'm going to do everything I can to stay close to you. I won't let anyone take you or your brothers away." Ella studied him for a long moment, her small face etched with determination. "Promise." "I promise," Nathaniel said, his voice steady. "But right now, we have to trust Angela." Ella glanced at Angela, then back at Nathaniel. Finally, she nodded. "Okay." The next hour was a blur of hurried preparations. Nathaniel packed bags for the children, filling them with warm clothes, snacks, and small comfort items he thought might ease the transition. Ella helped, her movements stiff but efficient. Charlie clung to her side, his wide eyes filled with confusion, while Max dozed fitfully in Nathaniel's arms. When the time came to leave, Angela led the group to an unmarked van parked in the alley behind the bakery. Two plainclothes officers stood nearby, their presence both reassuring and ominous. Nathaniel helped the children into the van, settling them into the back seat before climbing in himself. The drive was tense and silent, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of Max's blanket. Nathaniel held Ella's hand, offering silent reassurance as the town disappeared behind them. After an hour, the van pulled up to a modest farmhouse surrounded by dense woods. The officers exited first, scanning the area before signaling that it was safe. Angela ushered the group inside, where another social worker greeted them warmly. "This will be your home for now," Angela explained as they stepped into the cozy living room. "There's plenty of space, and the staff here will take good care of you." Ella clung to Nathaniel's arm, her wide eyes taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. "You're staying, right?" she whispered. Nathaniel knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'll be nearby," he promised, "and I'll visit as often as I can." Ella's lip trembled, but she nodded bravely. "Okay." That night, as the children settled into their new beds, Nathaniel sat by the window, staring out at the dark woods. His heart ached with worry and guilt, but he knew he had made the right choice. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of their fight for safety, stability, and justice. He would see it through, no matter what it took. Shadows of the past. The farmhouse was quiet as the morning sun filtered through the frosted windows. A serene silence filled the air, broken only by the occasional chirp of birds outside. For Nathaniel, however, the peace felt fragile, as though a single misstep could shatter it. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring blankly at the steam rising from the mug. Ella, Charlie, and Max were still asleep upstairs, their small bodies finally relaxed after the chaos of the past few days. Nathaniel had stayed up late, ensuring they were settled and comfortable in their new surroundings. He tucked them in with whispered promises that they would be safe here, but the truth gnawed at him. Safety was a tenuous thing. Angela entered the kitchen, a folder tucked under her arm. She offered Nathaniel a tired smile and poured herself a cup of coffee before sitting across from him. "How are you holding up?" she asked. Nathaniel shrugged, his fingers tightening around the mug. "Better question is, how are they holding up?" Angela nodded, her face thoughtful. "They're resilient, but it's going to take time. Trauma like theirs doesn't just disappear because they're in a safe place." Nathaniel sighed. "I know, but I hate that they're carrying this weight. They're just kids." Angela opened the folder and slid a few papers across the table. "That's why I wanted to talk to you. The investigation is progressing, and we're starting to piece together the children's history. It's disturbing." Nathaniel leaned forward, scanning the documents. There were photos of rundown houses, reports detailing suspected trafficking routes, and lists of aliases connected to a man named Victor Cross, a name Angela had mentioned before. Cross, she explained, was the suspected leader of the trafficking ring. The children were held in multiple locations, Angela said, her voice steady but grim. "We believe Ella and her brothers were moved frequently to avoid detection. They were likely being groomed as leverage to control others." Nathaniel clenched his jaw. And no one noticed. No one saw what was happening. Angela sighed. "People often see what they want to see. These operations are calculated. They prey on vulnerable children, often those who've fallen through the cracks of the system." Nathaniel shook his head, anger bubbling beneath his skin. "It's disgusting. How can anyone justify treating kids like this?" "They don't justify it," Angela said softly. "They just don't care." Later that morning, Nathaniel joined the children in the living room, where a social worker named Marissa was helping them play with a box of donated toys. Ella sat cross-legged on the carpet, building a tower with wooden blocks while Charlie zoomed a toy car across the floor. Max toddled around the room, his laughter like a bright note in the otherwise heady atmosphere. Nathaniel crouched beside Ella, watching as she carefully balanced another block on top of her tower. "That's impressive," he said with a smile. "You're an architect in the making." Ella glanced at him, her expression softening. "I just like building things." "Well, you're good at it," Nathaniel said, ruffling her hair. She hesitated, then asked, "Are we going to stay here forever?" Nathaniel's heart ached at the uncertainty in her voice. "Not forever," he said gently, "but for now. This is the safest place, and I'm not going anywhere." Ella's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Okay." That afternoon, while the children napped, Nathaniel sat with Angela in the study. The room was lined with shelves of old books and smelled faintly of cedar. Angela had brought more updates, including disturbing news about Victor Cross. "Cross is a ghost," Angela explained, spreading out a map of suspected trafficking routes. "He doesn't leave a trail, and his associates are just as careful. But we've managed to intercept a few communications." Nathaniel leaned over the map, his brow furrowed. "What kind of communications?" Angela hesitated before answering. "Threats. Cross and his people know we have the children, and they're not happy about it. They've started spreading disinformation, trying to turn attention away from their operations." Nathaniel frowned. "What can I do to help?" Angela looked at him, her expression serious. "You're already doing a lot by staying with the children. But if you're willing, there's something more you could do." "Anything," Nathaniel said without hesitation. Angela took a deep breath. "The children trust you, especially Ella. If she's willing, she might be able to give us more details about the places they were kept. Little things, a name, a specific location, even a conversation she overheard, could help us build a stronger case." Nathaniel's chest tightened. He didn't want to push Ella to relive those traumatic experiences, but he also knew how important it was to dismantle Cross's operation. "I'll talk to her," he said, "but only if she's ready." That evening, Nathaniel sat with Ella on the porch. The sun was setting, casting the sky in hues of pink and orange. Ella held a steaming mug of hot chocolate, her small hands wrapped around it. "Ella," Nathaniel began gently, "can I ask you something?" She nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "When you were with that woman, Miss Janice, do you remember anything about the places you stayed? Anything that might help the police?" Ella was quiet for a long moment, her brow furrowed. "There was a house," she said finally. "It was big but old. The floors creaked, and the windows were boarded up." Nathaniel listened intently. "Do you remember where it was?" Ella shook her head. "No, but there was a sign on the fence. It said, 'Green Valley.'" Nathaniel's heart raced. "That's good, Ella. That's really helpful." Ella glanced at him, her expression uncertain. "Will it stop them? The bad people?" Nathaniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's a step in the right direction. You're helping us stop them, Ella. You're really brave." She leaned against him, her small frame relaxing. "I just want them to leave us alone." "They will," Nathaniel promised. "We'll make sure of it." As night fell, Nathaniel relayed Ella's information to Angela, who immediately contacted the investigative team. The name Green Valley sparked recognition among the officers, and within hours they had pinpointed a property that matched Ella's description. Nathaniel couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. For the first time, they were closing in on the people who had hurt these children. But he also knew the fight was far from over. Cross's operation was vast, and taking it down would require more than just one lead. As Nathaniel checked on the children one last time before bed, he felt a surge of protectiveness. Ella, Charlie, and Max had been through so much, but they were survivors. And as long as they had him, and each other, they wouldn't have to face their fears alone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight, Nathaniel allowed himself to hope. A glimmer of hope. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Nathaniel hardly slept, his mind constantly consumed with thoughts of Ella, Charlie, and Max. Despite the relative safety of the farmhouse, the sense of unease never fully left him. He spent every waking moment with the children, doing his best to fill their days with calm and routine. But it wasn't easy. The trauma they had endured had left deep scars, and their fear, though not always visible, lingered like a shadow, especially in Ella's eyes. Ella had become more comfortable over time, but she remained distant, her defenses high. Charlie and Max, on the other hand, were more willing to trust, their smiles slowly returning as they settled into their new surroundings. But Ella watched them closely, as if afraid that their happiness would be taken away at any moment. Nathaniel did his best to provide some semblance of normalcy for them. He set up art projects, games, and even taught them to bake simple treats in the kitchen. Each time they laughed or showed even the smallest spark of joy, he allowed himself to believe that, maybe, just maybe, they could heal from this. But the reality of their situation was always present, lurking just beneath the surface. Angela continued her investigation, following every lead, but Nathaniel knew that it was only a matter of time before the full extent of the trafficking ring would be revealed. Each day, new information came in: names, addresses, routes, but nothing concrete enough to put Victor Cross behind bars. The operation was still vast, its network sprawling. Even worse, Cross's associates were beginning to tighten their grip, taking more desperate measures to cover their tracks. One rainy afternoon, Nathaniel took the children out for a walk in the woods behind the farmhouse. The clouds hummed low in the sky, and the air smelled fresh and damp. The children had been cooped up inside for too long, and Nathaniel wanted to give them a chance to stretch their legs. Max toddled ahead, his small legs moving faster than his balance could manage, while Charlie, ever the protective older brother, stayed close by, watching over him. Ella walked beside Nathaniel, her gaze drifting to the ground as they made their way through the trees. Her silence was familiar, but Nathaniel knew that she had questions, things she needed to say but was afraid to voice. "Ella," he began gently, "I know you're scared. I can see it. But you don't have to carry all of this alone. I'm here for you, okay?" She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she kicked at a stone on the path, sending it tumbling into the underbrush. Her shoulders were tense, her face unreadable. "I know you want to protect your brothers," Nathaniel continued, "but it's okay to let others help you too." Ella stopped walking and looked at him, her face a mixture of defiance and vulnerability. "I'm not afraid," she said, her voice quiet but firm. I don't want anyone else to get hurt. Not Charlie. Not Max. Not you." Nathaniel's heart twisted at her words. She had taken on the role of protector so quickly, and it had cost her. She had grown up far too fast. "You don't have to protect everyone," Nathaniel said softly. "You're just a kid, Ella. You deserve to feel safe and to have someone protect you too." Ella looked up at him then, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to decide if she could trust him with her deepest fears. After a long moment, she spoke again, her voice small but steady. "Will they ever find us? The people who took us?" Nathaniel crouched down to her level, his gaze softening. "I don't know, Ella, but I promise you, we're doing everything we can to make sure they don't." Ella's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly wiped them away, as if embarrassed by the weakness. Nathaniel felt a surge of protectiveness wash over him, and without thinking, he pulled her into a hug. She stiffened at first, but then relaxed into his embrace, her small body trembling as if releasing some of the pent-up fear she had carried for so long. "You're safe now, Ella," Nathaniel whispered. "I won't let them hurt you anymore. You're my family, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe." Ella didn't say anything, but he felt her nod against his chest. For the first time since they had arrived, Nathaniel felt a shift. A small crack in the wall Ella had built around herself. The next day, Nathaniel received a call from Angela, her voice tense and urgent. "We need to talk," she said, cutting straight to the point. "I have news. It's about the trafficking ring." Nathaniel's pulse quickened. "What is it? What's going on?" "Victor Cross is moving faster than we thought," Angela replied. "He's been targeting other children, and we found a potential safe house he's using to house some of the victims. But we need to act quickly. The longer we wait, the more dangerous it becomes." Nathaniel's stomach twisted. "And the kids? Are they in danger?" Angela's voice softened. "We don't know yet, but there's been chatter. We believe Cross is aware that the children are in hiding. If he finds them, he'll stop at nothing to get them back." Nathaniel clenched his jaw. "What do we do?" "We have to move them again," Angela said, her voice filled with determination. "I know it's not ideal, but we can't risk their safety. We've arranged a new location for them, one that's safer, but we need you to bring them to the new place as soon as possible." Nathaniel hesitated, his mind racing. He had promised Ella he wouldn't let anyone take her or her brothers away again, but Angela was right. This wasn't a game. It was a fight for their lives. "I'll pack their things," Nathaniel said, his voice steady. "Where do we go?" Angela provided the details, and they quickly made a plan to move the children that night. As Nathaniel hung up the phone, he felt a wave of dread wash over him. It seemed like they were always running, always on the move, always in hiding. But the threat wasn't just physical. It was psychological too. Each time they had to leave a place, it chipped away at the sense of security Nathaniel had been trying to build for the children. That evening, as the children played in the living room, Nathaniel gathered their belongings. He moved quickly, but with a quiet urgency, as if each minute mattered. When everything was packed, he sat down with Ella, Charlie, and Max, who had become accustomed to these sudden changes. "I need to talk to you all," Nathaniel said, his voice calm but firm. "We're going to move again tonight. There's a new place that's going to be even safer for you." Ella's face tightened. "Why? We just got here." "I know it's hard," Nathaniel said softly, "but we have to do this to stay safe. The people who hurt you, they're still looking for you." Ella's lip trembled, but she didn't argue. She understood, even if she hated it. Max, ever the innocent one, tugged at Nathaniel's sleeve, his small voice filled with worry. "Where are we going, Daddy?" he asked. Nathaniel smiled gently. "We're going to a new house, buddy. It's going to be a little different, but we'll be together and we'll be safe." Charlie, who had been quietly watching, suddenly spoke up. "Will we have a room with a bed? I don't like sleeping on the floor." Nathaniel nodded. "You'll have your own room, a real bed, and maybe some new toys to play with." The promise of a new bed seemed to lift Charlie's spirits, and he smiled. But Ella's eyes were still filled with worry, and Nathaniel knew she wasn't fully convinced. He didn't blame her. This life they were living was far from normal, and every change made it harder for her to trust that safety wasn't just temporary. As night fell and they loaded into the van, Nathaniel glanced back at the farmhouse. He had come to care for this place, even though it had never been a permanent home. It had been a haven for a while, a brief respite from the storm. But as the van pulled away, Nathaniel knew the storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. In the back seat, Ella held Charlie's hand tightly, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Nathaniel could only hope that one day they would be able to stop running and find peace. Until then, he would continue to fight for their safety, one step at a time. The breaking point. The new safe house was a sprawling farmhouse tucked deep within a secluded valley. Surrounded by dense woods and miles from the nearest neighbor, it felt almost like an impenetrable fortress. But as Nathaniel stepped out of the van with Ella, Charlie, and Max, a heavy sense of dread settled over him. It wasn't the place itself. No, it was the fact that they were moving again, uprooting their lives, and starting fresh once more. He could see it in Ella's eyes. The exhaustion, the weariness. Each time they moved, each time they were thrust into a new, unfamiliar place, it chipped away at her trust. The children clung to Nathaniel's side as they entered the house. The walls were lined with warm colors and cozy furniture, but it felt like a temporary refuge. Just another stop on a never-ending journey. The doors were locked, the windows reinforced, and security cameras covered every possible entrance. It was as safe as it could get, but safety meant nothing when the fear never left. Ella had become more withdrawn over the past few days. She didn't speak much, and whenever Nathaniel tried to comfort her, her eyes would flicker with distrust. He could see her silently counting the hours until they would have to move again. Even Charlie, who had been more cheerful, seemed to pick up on the undercurrent of unease. Max, still too young to fully understand what was happening, sensed the tension and grew quieter with each passing day. Nathaniel tried to keep their lives as normal as possible. He taught the children how to make simple crafts, played games with them, and even introduced them to the joys of baking. But the memories of what they had been through were always there, lurking just beneath the surface. Despite his best efforts, Nathaniel could sense that the children, especially Ella, were losing hope. They had become accustomed to running, to hiding, and he feared that they would never feel safe again. The quiet rhythm of the house was interrupted one evening by a sharp knock on the door. Nathaniel froze, his heart racing in his chest. It was late, the children were already in bed, and no one was supposed to visit. His mind immediately went to the worst-case scenario. Cross. His associates. They had found them. He stood motionless for a moment, listening. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Nathaniel reached for his phone, his thumb hovering over the emergency contacts. He didn't dare open the door without knowing who was on the other side. After a long pause, a voice called out softly, almost as though they were trying to reassure him. "Nathaniel, it's Angela." Relief flooded Nathaniel's body, but he didn't immediately move. "Angela," he called back. "What's going on?" There was a brief silence before she spoke again, her voice laced with concern. "I need to speak with you. It's urgent." Nathaniel didn't hesitate this time. He quickly unlocked the door and opened it, his eyes searching for any sign of danger. Angela stepped into the doorway, her expression grim. "Come in," Nathaniel said, stepping aside. "What's happened?" Angela entered the house, her eyes scanning the room as if making sure everything was secure. "We've got a situation," she said quietly. "I just got word from the police. Victor Cross is on the move. He's pulling in resources, and he's starting to target people who've been helping the kids." Nathaniel felt his stomach drop. "What do you mean, targeting people?" "He's heard about the safe houses," Angela continued, her voice tight. "And he's getting desperate. He's threatening anyone he suspects might be involved. We think he's close to finding this place." The words hit Nathaniel like a ton of bricks. For weeks, he had hoped that they would be able to find some semblance of peace, but now it seemed like they were running again, even in this secluded place. The idea that Cross and his associates were out there, looking for them, sent a shiver down Nathaniel's spine. "What do we do?" Nathaniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to stay alert," Angela said, her eyes intense. "I'm arranging for extra patrols in the area, and we'll have backup on standby. But I need you to be ready. If he comes, you have to act fast. I'll be here as soon as I can, but for now, you need to protect the kids." Nathaniel nodded, his mind racing. He knew that staying in one place was never going to be an option, not as long as Cross was out there. He couldn't risk the children's safety any longer. But at the same time, he couldn't bear the thought of moving them again. "Do they know?" Nathaniel asked, referring to the children. "No," Angela replied. "We've kept them in the dark for now. They don't need to know the full extent of the danger, especially Ella. But we have to be careful. If Cross is as close as we think, we might not have much time." Nathaniel spent the next few hours pacing the small living room, his mind reeling. The children were safe for now, but for how long? What could they do to keep them safe? He couldn't just let them live in constant fear, but every day felt like they were teetering on the edge of something awful. The children needed him to be strong, to be a beacon of stability. But how could he be that for them when he was terrified too? Around midnight, Nathaniel sat down on the couch, exhaustion settling in his bones. He was so focused on his thoughts that he didn't hear the soft footsteps approaching until he felt a small hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Ella standing in front of him, her face pale in the dim light. Her expression was serious, and Nathaniel could see the weight of her worry in her eyes. "I'm scared," Ella said, her voice small. Nathaniel's heart broke at the sight of her. She had tried so hard to hold it together, to protect her brothers, but the fear was there, and it was too much for her to bear alone. He reached out, pulling her into his arms. "I know, Ella. I know," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm scared too, but I'm not going anywhere. I'll protect you and your brothers, no matter what." Ella didn't speak for a long time. She simply clung to Nathaniel, as if seeking some kind of reassurance that, no matter what happened, they would survive this, that they would have a future. After a few minutes, Ella pulled away slightly, her small hand still resting on Nathaniel's arm. "Can I stay with you tonight?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Nathaniel smiled softly. "Of course. You can stay as long as you need." He helped her get comfortable on the couch, tucking a blanket around her small frame. As he settled beside her, Nathaniel couldn't help but feel a sense of hopelessness. They couldn't keep running forever. He could protect Ella and the others for now, but there was no guarantee that they would always be safe. As the quiet of the house settled over them, Nathaniel closed his eyes, hoping that tomorrow would bring some answers. He couldn't change the past, but he could protect these children. And as long as he had breath in his body, he would fight to keep them safe. The world outside might be a dangerous place, but as long as they were together, Nathaniel believed they had a chance. And that glimmer of hope was all he had left to hold on to.